The look on my son-in-law's face when the waiter handed him the bill for that $4,000 dinner was worth every single penny I'd spent on the private investigator. Greg's hand actually started to shake, his thumb hovering over a credit card he didn't realize was already useless, while my daughter Sarah looked at me with a mix of confusion and mounting panic. 20 years of providing for them, 30 years of building a legacy, and they truly thought they could put me out to pasture while they grazed on my life's work. But to understand why Greg was about to have the worst night of his life, I need to take you back to the beginning, to the day they decided I was no longer fit to hold my own wallet. I'm 72 years old. For 44 of those years, I worked at the Miller-Randall chemical plant. I started as a floor technician smelling like sulfur every night and retired as the vice president of operations. I didn't get there by being soft, and I didn't get there by being lucky. I got there by being the first one in and the last one out. I built the house my children grew up in with my own 2 hands on 10 acres of prime land in Oak Haven. I paid for Sarah's law degree and my son Michael's medical school. And when my wife, Martha, passed away 5 years ago, I made sure they were both taken care of. Between my smart investments, the sale of my shares, and a very healthy pension, I was sitting on a nest egg of about $3 million. That should have been my victory lap. I wanted to travel, maybe restore that 1967 Mustang sitting in the garage, and spoil my grandkids. But that's the thing about building a mountain. The people at the bottom start looking at it like it's their own. The first crock appeared last Thanksgiving. We were all gathered at the big oak table I'd polished 1,000 times. Greg, my son-in-law, is one of those guys who wears a suit to a backyard barbecue just so you know he's a consultant. He started making these little comments. "Art, you're looking a bit tired lately," he'd say. Or, "I noticed you forgot to turn the sprinklers off again. Is everything okay upstairs?" He'd tap his temple and give Sarah a look, that poor old dad look. I dismissed it. I figured he was just being his usual arrogant self. That should have been my wake-up call. But I kept telling myself he was just trying to be helpful in his own twisted way. Then came the family meeting. That's what they called it. 2 months ago, Sarah, Michael, and Greg sat me down in my own living room. Greg had a leather-bound folder with him. He laid out a plan where he and Sarah would take over the burden of managing my finances. He talked about asset protection and long-term security. "Dad," Sarah said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We just want to make sure you're protected. There are so many scammers out there targeting seniors. Greg has designed a specialized trust. You'll have a monthly allowance of $500 for your personal needs, and we'll handle the rest, the taxes, the utilities, the big stuff. It'll be a weight off your shoulders." $500 from a $3 million estate that I built. I looked at Michael, my own son, expecting him to see the insanity of it, but he just nodded. "Greg knows what he's doing, Dad. It's for the best. We don't want you worrying about the market or the bills anymore." If that was all, I probably would have let it go for a while, thinking they were just overzealous. But then came the realization of what was actually happening. I agreed to their little trial period mostly because I was stunned and wanted to see how far they'd go. I didn't sign the power of attorney yet. I told them I'd think about it, but I gave them access to a secondary account to manage the household. The very next week, I went to the hardware store to buy a new chainsaw. My old one had finally kicked the bucket, and I had some clearing to do on the back acreage. The total was $600. My card was declined. I had to leave the store empty-handed while the cashier, a boy I'd known since he was in diapers, looked at me with pity. I called Greg, thinking it was a mistake. "Art," Greg sighed over the phone, sounding like a bored teacher talking to a slow child. "A chainsaw? At your age? That's a safety hazard, and it's over your monthly discretionary limit. We discussed this. If you want something that expensive, you need to submit a request so we can see if it fits the quarterly budget." I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. And that's when I realized they didn't see me as their father. They saw me as a bank account with a heartbeat that was taking too long to stop. They weren't protecting my future. They were protecting their inheritance. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just went home, made a pot of coffee, and started making calls. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I'm a methodical man. You don't run a chemical plant for 20 years without learning how to handle volatile substances. I contacted an old friend from the plant, a man named Saul who had gone into estate law. We met in a dingy diner 3 towns over, far away from any prying eyes. "Arthur," Saul told me, looking over the documents Greg had tried to get me to sign, "this isn't a trust. This is a cage. If you'd signed this power of attorney, he could have sold your house out from under you while you were taking a nap." I found out through a private investigator Saul recommended that Greg's consulting firm was actually drowning in debt. He'd lost a fortune on some cryptocurrency scam and was 2 months behind on the lease for his fancy office. He wasn't trying to protect my $3 million. He was trying to use it to bail himself out of a sinking ship. And Sarah, my own daughter, was so blinded by him, or perhaps her own greed, that she was helping him do it. They'd already used the household management access I gave them to move $50,000 into a management fee account. I didn't say a word. I played the part of the compliant, aging father. I let Greg lecture me on my spending habits. I even let him tell me that I should consider moving into a luxury senior community because the Oak Haven house was too much for me to maintain. Every time he spoke, I just nodded and asked if my $500 would cover a new pair of walking shoes. He'd smirk, pop me on the shoulder, and tell me he'd check the spreadsheets. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. The reckoning happened last night. It was Greg's 40th birthday, and he'd insisted on a celebration at the Gilded Oak, the most expensive steakhouse in the city. He'd invited a dozen of his high-net-worth friends and associates. He told me he'd authorize an extra $50 for my allowance so I could buy him a nice bottle of scotch. I told him I had a better gift in mind. We were all there, sitting at a long table under crystal chandeliers. Greg was at the head, holding court, bragging about his portfolio management and how he was stabilizing family assets. Sarah was glowing, wearing a new diamond necklace I'm certain was bought with my management fees. When the bill came, the $4,000 total for the Wagyu beef, the vintage wine, and the top-shelf spirits, Greg did exactly what I expected. He reached for his wallet with the practiced ease of a man spending someone else's money. He handed the waiter his black card, the one linked to the account he thought he'd successfully siphoned from my pension.
5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He leaned in and whispered, "I'm sorry, sir, this card has been declined." Greg laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "That's impossible. Try it again, or use this one." He handed over a second card. Declined. "Is there a problem, Greg?" I asked, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the chatter of the table. "Just a glitch at the bank, Art. Don't worry about it," Greg snapped, his face turning a blotchy shade of red. He tried a third card. Declined. His friends were starting to whisper. Sarah was looking at him, her smile fading into a mask of embarrassment. "Maybe you should check your discretionary limit for the month," I said. I pulled a thick envelope from my coat pocket and slid it across the white tablecloth. "Or better yet, you can read these." Greg opened the envelope. His face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. Inside were the legal revocations of every access I'd given them. There was a demand for the immediate return of the $50,000 in management fees, backed by a forensic accounting report. And finally, there was the new trust document. "What is this?" Greg stammered, his voice trembling. "It's my asset protection plan, Greg," I said, leaning back and taking a slow sip of my water. "I realized you were right. I am getting older, and I need to make sure my money is safe from predators. So I've moved the entire $3 million pension, the house, and all my investments into a blind charitable trust. It's managed by an independent board at the university. I get a very comfortable, very generous monthly draw, considerably more than $500, I might add. And upon my death, the remainder goes to the engineering scholarship fund." You gave it away?" Michael gasped, his fork clattering against his plate. "Dad, that was our inheritance." "Inheritance is something earned through respect and care, Michael," I said, looking my son dead in the eye. "Not something you steal from a man while he's still breathing. As for the house, I've decided to keep living there. But since you and Sarah were so worried about the burden of maintenance, I've hired a professional property management team. They'll be sending you the bill for the $50,000 you borrowed, Greg. My lawyer, Saul, expects it by Friday, or he'll be filing a criminal complaint for elder financial abuse." The silence at the table was absolute. Greg's friends were suddenly very interested in their dessert spoons. Greg himself looked like he was about to vomit.
He looked at the $4,000 bill sitting on the table, then at his useless cards, then at me. "I can't pay this," he whispered. "Well," I said, standing up and buttoning my coat, "I'd love to help you out, Greg, but unfortunately I've already spent my $500 allowance for the month on that chainsaw you didn't want me to have. It's a beauty, by the way. Slices through dead wood like butter." I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high, the sound of Greg trying to explain himself to the manager fading behind me. The aftermath was swift. Greg's consulting firm folded a month later when word got out about his financial troubles. Sarah called me crying, blaming Greg for everything, but I told her that she was the one who sat in my living room and told me I wasn't sharp enough to handle my own life. We're in low contact now, as the therapists say. Michael tries to visit, but it's awkward. He knows he traded his father's trust for a share of a pie that no longer exists. As for me, I'm doing just fine. I finished restoring that '67 Mustang. It purrs like a kitten. I took a trip to the Amalfi Coast last month, first class all the way. It's amazing how much you can afford when you aren't subsidizing his son-in-law's delusions of grandeur.
My son calls every Sunday now. He's very polite. He asks about my health and if I need anything around the house. He never mentions the allowance or the budget. It's funny how a little bit of consequences can restore a person's memory of how to treat their father. I usually let the call go to voicemail and get back to my garden. I have a lot of work to do, and for the first time in a long time, I have all the tools I need to do it. Peace and dignity. You can't put a price on that, but if you could, it'd be worth a hell of a lot more than $3 million.